Yeah.
All right, party people. Hello and welcome to an episode of the Work 4.0 podcast. We've got the MatterMore team here. We are sitting down to talk a little bit about our story. Why does this company exist? Why the hell are we working together? And what are the big challenges facing our world? And what are our hypotheses for how we can solve them together? So thanks for being here. And Sydney, thanks for taking the lead and really guiding this conversation.
It's an honor. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. I think you're really cool.
I think you're cool too.
Thanks. And everybody listening, like Matt said, we want to have a really honest conversation about what it is we're doing and why. And hopefully also answer some questions that I think we've been hearing from a lot of our community. Go into some of the background of what does it take to be a good leader? And what are leaders really struggling with today? And what are some ways that we all might be able to take action to create more of the experiences that we wish existed? And so let's dive in. I'm really curious to hear from you now what it is that I want to start with. Like, why is it that you, how do I want to put this? I was thinking about questions before getting here this morning, and I want to start off strong with what is it that gets you out of bed every day these days? What is it that you're waking up for these days? What is your personal mission and vision and your reason for being right now?
Kick us off.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for guiding us through this conversation. Matt made a comment earlier that I grew up without a male role model in the house. And the truth is that I was starved for leaders. I was starved for healthy examples of what leadership looked like in my life. And when I was a kid, I would look externally, grasping for examples that I could learn from, that I could take away from. And it really caused me to become very much like a sponge, open to learning and seeing what I could take from others that I could apply to my own life. But because of that externalization, I didn't really connect with what was most important to me and what were my values. And this led me to continue to operate in ways for what others wanted for me, or what I thought others wanted from me. And so for most of my 20s, I was living in a way that didn't really fulfill me. It didn't light me up. And in some ways, it was actually, I was living completely out of full alignment or integrity with who I was and what was most important to me. And when I met Matt, and really it was back in 2018, a few years before the pandemic, that two major things happened in my life. One is I actually had one of my first really healthy role models show up in my life, who pulled me into a community of other leaders and other people who I could respect, all of which were men. It was a men's group and organization where men came together to work on emotional leadership training and development. And from that space, I was now exposed to all of these really powerful people who were embodying a different way of living that I had always thought about and read about, but I never actually embodied in my own life. The other thing that happened was a group of friends of mine built an accountability group where every Sunday for an hour or two, we would actually lay out all of the different areas of our life that we were focusing on and what was the progress we were making. And also, where were we falling short or not really following through on the things that we said we would do? And so I now had this directional role model examples of leadership and mentorship. And then I had this peer group where I actually could start to get feedback in a safe way, where my emotions were present and I could be myself, but I could also actually start to look at my life more critically, and I could hold myself to account. And those two things led me to actually transform how I was living on a daily and weekly basis, where I started to see those changes take hold. At that point, I decided that I was done with my last company. We were able to sell it right before COVID hit. And that's when I had the space to think about, or to feel into, what do I want to take all of the gifts and resources and privilege that I have been given, and how could I invest it into creating more spaces where leadership and accountability and empowerment could thrive in a way that was accessible and approachable for people of all different walks of life. And so every single day, we're fighting a battle, or we're fighting a war to increase the amount of space and freedom for people to tap into that. So that's what's getting me up every day.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
If I were to set a timer for 30 seconds and invite you to drop into your mornings and really think about the emotional experience of your mornings and like getting up to go to work. We work a shit ton of hours every week. Why do you do that? Why do you care about the work that we're doing? And if you had to explain that in 30 seconds or less,
Ooh, fun one.
how would you do it? Tell me when you're ready.
Ready. So when I wake up, I feel so blessed that we get to work on this every single day, and I can't not work on it. And so it's not even a question of me having to drag myself. It's like when I wake up and we're going straight to the office, I know that we're locking in. That's to do something that's literally transforming the fundamental systems for how we work and operate in a way that my friends, their families, their kids are going to be able to live more freely and fully.
Time.
Nice.
Sick. Okay.
Thank you for that. Matt, do you want to take the same question? What's your reason for being and waking up every day these days?
Yeah. I had a really painful childhood. Despite really being born into what I would call an abundance of riches, two parents that love each other, were pretty well off, and went to, on paper, what were really great schools. I struggled with a lot of pain, and I was challenged with having ADHD and being this sort of like problem child everywhere I went. I didn't know how to deal with anything in my inner world, and that led me into becoming an addict, and I never really felt like a whole person. And then when my journey took me into facing that and trying to figure out how people work, and then eventually working with people as a therapist, and then working with schools and other therapists and leaders, I've seen so much pain and navigated through with thousands of people through the most painful stories that they carry, the darkest corners of their hearts. And I'm angry. Like, I'm pissed off. There's an injustice happening at a macro level, which is that technologically we have never been better off. Prosperity is here. It is not evenly distributed. And we know too much when it comes to the behavioral science and what we understand about well-being. We know too much about what people need in order to be empowered to live really fulfilling lives. And we have too much amazing technology to have so many people lonely, depressed, anxious, killing themselves, overdosing. numbers that have
Mm.
skyrocketed through the last 2 decades. And I've seen it. I've seen the power of helping people and creating systems that can empower people to live fuller lives, and that it's hard, but it's not that complex. It's a design problem. And so that just deepens my anger, because it's about just prioritizing it and creating the tools and systems that bring that to people. And we're being lied to. We're falling for bullshit mythologies that the people at the top of the societal power chain are telling, that are reinforcing the ways that keep us stuck. And so like I wake up with a massive wind in my sails, because one, I just love the work that we do. And two, I am carrying the stories of every kid that I've ever worked with to help navigate their way through school or overcome a mental health challenge. Every family I've ever worked with to help them set up systems for connecting with each other and raising their kids. Every teacher I've ever worked with that felt like they weren't trained on how do you actually support somebody with their mental health and well-being. Every person in their 20s or 30s I've ever worked with that feels like they followed the rules and played the game, and they're not living the fulfilling life that they thought they would be. And so I carry all of that with me. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm serving that. But really more selfishly, it's the most fun I've ever had.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It feels so good to receive and reflect. And a question coming up now for both of you, weaving into what you both shared, is for those that are listening that are just new. They're new to us. They're new to MatterMore, to Work 4.0. They're just getting acquainted, but they feel a resonance. This is making sense so far. And I know I'm privileged to get to know you. We just met each other a few months ago, but it feels like it's been a very deep dive in a short amount of time, which is part of the magic of being pretty present and attuned and available. And I feel honored to understand how you're both orienting and what qualifies you to be able to talk about these things. But for those who are new to you, what qualifies you to be able to build something to transform leadership in the world beyond what you've just shared? Like, what really qualifies you? How is it that you uniquely really understand how to innovate these ancient systems, how to upgrade work as we know it, how to really create this missing piece that so many people are craving right now?
Nothing. There is nothing that qualifies us more than anyone else, is one answer, right? One is that in this world, every single person has a right to bring their voice and their power to the conversation around how do we shape systems that structure the ways we live together. That isn't a table that we need to keep people away from. And so first and foremost is like, we're not super special. Like we're doing this work because we believe in the power of people. And so we want this to be a collective and group conversation. So that's one answer. The other thing that I'll say is around who we are and our zones of genius and our life experiences. The thing I admire about Matthew most is that he looks for and finds teachers everywhere. He can't not create community and connection wherever he goes. It's like this thing that's just always boiling in him. He's like always looking for it and like creating it. And we're the loneliest humans the world's ever seen. A lot of people don't have those skills, despite the fact that every single person walks around with that same yearning to want to be seen and appreciated and valued by other people. It's our deepest wiring. And so I think that skill is something that you actually have a responsibility to utilize. And so that's one of the skills that like he brings to the table. And then for me, I think my deepest qualification is that I was a really sensitive kid who had ADHD and didn't understand people. And so from the very beginning, when I started just being around people in preschool and elementary school, I was confused and trying to figure people out. And I was sensitive. Like every kid with ADHD is deep down, and I didn't have enough skills to deal with it. And so I felt these injustices around how the systems of a classroom were being run and the power structures, and felt like a failure there. And I was just lost. And navigating through that deep sense of feeling stuck and alone and lost through most of my life, and then having to dive into the depths of philosophy as I studied in undergrad, and then traveling all around the world, learning about philosophy and behavior science, both in undergrad and through grad school, as I became a licensed therapist, and then started working with a lot of clients across the mental health spectrum with all sorts of diagnoses, individuals, kids, adults, families, couples. This weird thing started happening, which is like other therapists and educators would be like, hey, Matt, you know enough about this behavior science, and I don't know what to do here. What do I do? And so then I would just start leading conversations with people, and I'd start going to schools. And I was working in a school for a period of time, and I was astounded when I would walk into a school, or I'd walk into a lot of different therapy centers. I felt the way I would imagine a surgeon would feel if we sent them back in time 200 years ago and saw the way people were doing surgery without washing their hands. There are just such basic things that if you go exploring into the behavior science enough, that we have known for a long time, that we're just not utilizing, that we have not integrated in terms of how we operate our systems, our education system, our healthcare system, and our workplaces. And so walking around with that frustration and like navigating through those depths, and both just my personal life and my studies, and then trying to help people understand that stuff, trying to help individuals build those skills, trying to help schools transform their culture for teachers to be able to learn, then working with workplaces and leaders to structure organizations based on those principles, and really just exploring the questions. I've just spent a lot of time exploring the questions and other people that explore those questions. And so those are the skills I bring to the table. And so those add to our qualifications. But the point I think both of us would make is that every single person is qualified to be part of this conversation. And the core of what we do is about building technology that empowers people to create organizations that interconnect, to harness each person's power to shape our future systems. Everyone's qualified, and we need to build systems that respect that.
Awesome.
Yeah. One of the greatest injustices of our modern society was when people themselves started to feel like they were not qualified to be able to influence the health of their communities, the health of their relationships. When you used to, when you would imagine these villages, people would, when people were getting sick, they would look to each other, and then there would be a healer within the community who was carrying the medicine, and you could look to them and say, they're just like me. And that was inherently empowering. It was in the 1700s, even the 1600s, when the only people that could start to practice medicine or be a doctor were people wearing a kind of coat who went to a university that were usually, they were only men. And this started to erode the actual villagers' capacity to heal themselves and heal each other. So what's really interesting right now is that I don't think about us as, like Matt said, that it's a matter of our qualification as much as it's what are the qualities that enable people like us to stand up and to say that we can do something about this. And the blessing of working with Matt is that he has devoted all of his life force and all of his energy to understanding what are the systematic drivers that are causing all of this harm and suffering within our society on a mental, emotional, social, psychological, spiritual level. And then what are the actual tools and solutions that we have, and how can we actually implement them in a way that increases the likelihood of us to get out of this, to treat the root causes of mental illness, unwellness, and to actually build systems that promote flourishing and well-being. For me, I was forced into entrepreneurship. I was working in a crappy recruiting outfit where I got paid pennies, peanuts even, for a placement that the company was going to be making $30,000 and I was going to get $300 for that.
And just to be clear, that was just this particular recruiting outfit, not that all recruiting outfits are crappy. Good recruiters, we love you.
Recruiting is amazing. It's like one of the most powerful things in the world when you're telling people, hey, come from here, go there and do something more fulfilling. But as a recruiter myself, my first job out of school, I was being exploited. And I don't want to create a victim narrative for myself. I didn't know any better. As soon as I saw a path to being able to work for myself, I was pulled into it immediately. And it reminds me of a time when I was a kid in sleepaway camp. We were about 14 years old and we were about to go on an overnight. And you're a teenager, you don't want to go out. And it was going to be raining that night. And
How old were you?
I was about 14.
All right, that helps me visualize.
Yeah, so 14, it's a bright sunny day, but the forecast was calling in rain. And the kids were like, oh, we don't want to do an overnight. And so I got up on a rock, I grabbed a stick, and I started chanting. I said, what do we want to do? And we were like, we don't want to go on an overnight. Why not? Because it's going to rain. And I started just invoking these, I just started chanting these things. And all the kids were like, yeah, we're not going on this overnight. And obviously they forced us to go on the overnight.
As someone that used to run a summer camp with my brother,
God.
I'm like imagining of the counselors.
Anarchy.
Okay, and how are we going to deal with this anarchy with these 14-year-olds?
Oh, yeah. And so I co-opted the system because I went to a Jewish sleepaway camp. So I was like, what do we want? And they all yelled the Jewish name for God, Hashem. And I'm like, when do we want it? Now.
God.
And
Wow.
so it was just this ecstatic experience.
You were starting a cult.
I was starting
You
a cult.
started it.
But when I come back to what are some of the moments in my life where I felt the most alive and lit up, nobody told me to get up on that rock. There was something innately within me that said, I can get up here and I can start screaming my head off, and all of my friends are going to start screaming it too, because we had a shared purpose around not wanting to go on this overnight. And in the same way, each of us has this ability to look at the existing systems that we're living and working in and to stand up on our rock and say, this isn't cool.
Yeah.
This isn't working. And that was entrepreneurship for me, to look at a system and be like, I can mess with this. I can poke holes with this. I can play with this. And with all of Matt's expertise, I can support and empower. How do we take all of this and inject it and infuse it into the existing systems that we're living and operating in? And that takes courage.
Yeah. And the point here is the challenges that face us today are too big and too complex to not have billions of people empowered with the confidence and creativity at their maximum potential. We have too many big challenges facing us. We're dealing with ridiculously complex technologies that rely on us solving the alignment problem. So for those that don't know, the alignment problem is basically the root of all those terrifying AI sci-fi movies you've ever seen. So like in iRobot or the Terminator or the Matrix. The alignment problem is, how do we be sure to design and build technologies that align with our collective humanity values so that they don't go to war with us or try to delete us, so that ultimately they are technologies that serve or collaborate with us but don't try to dominate us. And when you think about it, it's really scary about this moment in time, because right now is really the riskiest time in the world history to try and build a technology like that, because we have the greatest number of people and the greatest ratio of people that feel lost and disconnected from what their individual values are and their ideas about what our shared values are and should be and how they should be enforced. And so how can we possibly build a system that will align with our collective values if we're struggling to even talk about what they are? And so at this moment in time, it's like the riskiest, but in the same vein, it's the time that we need them the most to help us, because we feel so overwhelmed with technology. Through the last couple decades, our rate of technological advancement has innovated so rapidly. Socioculturally, we've not been able to keep up. And so that's why we all feel so overwhelmed. Depression, anxiety, ADHD are overwhelmed states from the nervous system because we are overtaxed with content. And we're struggling to regulate our nervous systems. We're struggling to raise children with healthy attachment styles that can learn how to regulate their nervous systems. Emotional regulation isn't naturally developed. It is taught and developed through relationships and skill building. And so we're lacking the skills that we need most at the time when we most need them. And when you talk to folks that are designing the biggest AI companies, you can look it up on YouTube. Go and see, how do they talk about solving the alignment problem? There's a bunch of interviews with Sam Altman talking about, well, right now at a smaller scale, which is where we're at now, they've done a decent job of building a technology that addresses that. We don't have GPT encouraging people to commit violent acts towards themselves or others, as far as we're seeing so far. So there's been at least some protections there. But they admit that they have no idea how to solve that problem 100 years from now or at a larger scale. What they're betting on is the technology becoming advanced enough that the AI can then help them solve the alignment problem. But I don't know about you, but I don't want to put all my chips onto betting that the AI is going to be the thing that's going to help us design the system that's going to have the AI serve our interests. I want to bet on the people. I want to bet on the people collaborating together to create regulations and design principles that allow for those technologies to help us live more empowered lives. And that requires confidence. So there's this study done a while ago where they were studying dopamine. And they took these monkeys, put this like a neuroreceptor in their brains so they could measure the dopamine levels. And they thought the dopamine levels would be at their highest when they dropped this food out. So the experiment was, there's a light, and then when the light goes on, the monkeys have to press down this lever, and then when you press down this lever, then food comes out. They thought, cool, when the food comes out, that's when the dopamine will surge, but it's not. The dopamine surged when the light came on, because dopamine is about hunter-gatherers that travel all around the planet looking for new food, new lands, new sexual partners. And so it's about anticipation. The most exciting point of a vacation is your way to the airport. And so the dopamine is like fuel for action. But if you lock the lever, then the dopamine doesn't surge. So I have to trust that I am able to press the lever in order for me to get surge of dopamine, the fuel for my action, which means if I make a bunch of commitments to myself that then I continually break, then my confidence, my ability to do something goes down, which means I become more easily overwhelmed. My desperation and hopelessness grows. I have less belief that I can affect change. If I am showing up to work and doing all the things that people told me to do, to go to school, get good grades, get the good job, and then I feel like I'm drowning in debt, I can't afford a home, I'm like struggling to pay my bills, I don't know what happiness feels like in my body, I'm struggling to build relationships, and I'm feeling dark and cold. Like I don't trust myself that I can affect change and create a life that is fulfilling. And so we need to find ways to build systems that help people build that confidence together so that we have the capacity to solve the alignment problem, so that one, those technologies don't destroy us, but two, we can solve this content distribution problem, this resource allocation problem. And just think about it today. We have an alignment problem right now, not even thinking about AI. We have intelligent systems. They're called corporations. Think about Walmart and Meta. How aligned do you feel with them? How do they operate in comparison to what you believe your values and our shared values should be? We already have an alignment problem that we're struggling to solve. The way to solve it is help people build organizational systems that build skills within themselves to greater know who they are and what matters to them, and explore and define that together. Another way to say that is to build confident people that can create sustainable businesses You want to have an awesome business, you better know what you're doing and how you want to do it, which means what's your mission, vision, and values.
Mhm.
You guys know Yuval Noah Harari, author of *Sapiens*.
Mhm.
He has a quote that it stuck with me over the last few years, which is, the two most important skills for living today are knowing thyself, which is what are your values and what's most important to you, and to become really emotionally aware and to build an awareness of what's going on within your internal world. Why? Because right now we are being targeted by behavior modifying algorithms on a mass level and to a degree of precision that the human brain has never seen before. We are being assaulted on a minute by minute basis by groups and interests that have motives that don't necessarily align with what is each human's individual values and what does each person really want. And one of the things that I learned in working with Matt is that the other side of the alignment problem, because we can't control what these corporations do, we can influence it. Of what we can control is we have an adaptability problem as a species right now. What does that mean? Each of us has a choice when something happens in our lives. When there's a big event, a small event that shocks our system, we have the opportunity to either turn towards it, accept what we're dealing with, navigate through those uncomfortable emotions, and take action that brings us closer to our values. All of that is much easier said than done. But for the most part, the way that we've been conditioned to react to that is to close down, run away, hide, react, or to respond impulsively by trying to numb ourselves or play out whatever trauma we're holding in our bodies. The first way of responding is from a place called psychological flexibility, right? The other one is psychological rigidity. And the thing that's most sad about our society right now is that we have been so deeply conditioned towards rigidity, and we haven't been given the tools that promote adaptability. So when we're getting targeted by these algorithms, humans are becoming more and more predictable because when you take massive amounts of data and you start to run experiments as a social media company or as a business, you're able to predict with such accuracy what can you do that's going to lead someone to do something else, which puts all of us at a massive disadvantage and handicap when it comes to driving forward our lives and actually then in turn influencing these systems. So I almost think that we are deferring responsibility by saying that this is going to be an alignment problem that's going to be solved by the AI researchers who are working in these labs and have to figure it out, and AI is going to ruin our lives and all of that. Because all of this AI and all of these algorithms are already being steered with intentions that don't align with the human spirit that all of us who are listening right now care about.
And look throughout history, the people who have the peak of societal power so rarely are the ones then giving that up. They don't naturally then start to serve the interests of the masses. You need to have systems of accountability, checks and balances. That's why we have a republic, to put checks and balances around our psychological nature so that we can hold each other accountable to that responsibility. And so that doesn't happen magically. Just because some current CEOs of tech companies seem friendly doesn't mean we should trust them to regulate themselves. We have to have groups of people that work together to explore challenging questions and try to answer the question together. What matters to us? What are our values? What are our principles within this area, within this challenge? And how do we enforce them? How do we protect those values? How are we going to distribute resources? We can't just look up at the top and say, those people have a lot of money and a lot of technology. I'm sure they're going to do us right. Look at history. That doesn't happen. And then even just think for yourself. When there's something really challenging, the thing that flips that from being a terrifying, daunting threat to your being to then being an exciting adventure is trust within yourself or trust with others. You'd have to go climb a mountain and then cross a bridge. It's looking down. It's a lot less scary if you have your best friends there with you. Now it's an adventure. Or if you've done it before, you have trust within yourself. You know what? Oh, now it's an exciting challenge, another way for me to grow because I've seen myself do somewhat similar things before. And this is just a little stretch of that. And so we have to systematically rebuild and restore and regenerate the trust we have within ourselves and with each other, because without it, we can't take on those challenges.
And Matt and I spent years working together to first try and address the gaps within the mental health system. We were trying to catch people that weren't being served by it. And this whole conversation around corporations, it's so easy to vilify them and to look at corporations and say they're evil and all of that. What we realize is that if you look at where is power and resource and capital being concentrated, our corporations are now the places where innovation happens, where the best in leadership and development is coming together. It's not like our education systems are where we're really innovating. It's happening in our workplaces. So what we decided to do was go directly into the lion's den, into the belly of the beast, because it's not like any of these leaders, some of them maybe, it's not like all of these leaders are thinking, yeah, let's create these algorithms that are going to ruin everybody's lives and make everybody addicted to social media and sell them all of this product. Of course, there's interests that are driving that. But what we realize is that every single leader or manager, as they're coming up through that system, they're inheriting all of the toxic behaviors and all of the legacy systems that are rooted in a medieval, maybe industrial system of operating. And so what we said was, what if we could go directly to the source and reshape how these leaders are operating so that they themselves could start to feel more expansive, so they could develop more psychological flexibility, so they could have more freedom and choice for how they are showing up in their day-to-day, so that with that little bit of extra space, they could start to think a little bit more compassionately, a little bit more adaptively around themselves, but also how are their actions influencing the people around them who they work with, but then also their customers and the partners and their stakeholders and the planet.
Love it. Just taking a breath to metabolize the deep download that you guys are bringing, and thank you so much. And you started alluding a little bit to your moment of meeting and that you've worked together for years.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear from both of you. Personally, I'm just genuinely curious as well. If you could remember the specific moment that you met, and then another moment I want to hear about is when you decided to work together. And it's a really intimate moment when maybe you didn't think about it in the moment. That's going to be my business partner. But I'm curious about that. That's a big commitment to make. That's like entering into a marriage. So I want to know when you first met and when you decided to work together. What was it like?
It was the same moment. It was business partnership at first sight.
Oh man!
So I was sitting at my desk in my apartment. I was running like 3 different businesses, like doing a lot of training and speaking. I was seeing some people in one-on-one therapy, and then I was doing a lot of training, consulting, and coaching with different leaders and organizations. And I was exhausted. And I was carrying this question for a few months of, what do I really want to do here? Which of these things do I want to sunset? Where do I want to focus more of my energy? Do I want to build out a consultancy or like an agency or marketplace where I can get more providers working on these things with some of these frameworks and blueprints I've got going? It feels like there's some product I can be building here, but I hadn't been in the product world. I was in the behavior science world and the training and learning and development, education and mental health world. And so I was really just holding this question. And then a friend of mine from high school had a call with Matthew and was like, you need to meet my other friend, Matt. And we got on a Zoom call, and within the first few minutes, we were like talking about poetry and philosophy. And then we were like, all right, what do you what are you doing? What kind of stuff are you up to? And then by like the 10 or 11 minute mark in that conversation, we were like, oh, cool. So we should do a business together.
That's it.
Honestly, there are these moments in your life where it just happens and you don't even realize that it's happening. But you trust this your intuition is just saying, yes, keep going. This is the right energy to be in. My first company was building product for Fortune 500 brands, talking about these corporations. Thank you for all of that. And then we were working with a lot of startups. Ultimately, though, we had developed a specialty working with companies that were in the digital therapeutic space, which is how do you use technology, almost like a pharmaceutical, to be able to impact behaviors and health outcomes. You could think glucose monitors, step counters, behavioral trackers that were actually getting FDA regulated approval. And so that unlocked a switch for me to see that we could actually use technology to change how we were behaving and operating, which is something that I had been studying in school around human decision-making. And how could this technology actually be used not just to sell more product, but actually to influence our daily lives? So when it was time after we sold the agency and I was getting ready for my next thing, I was looking at the mental health space and I was seeing all of my friends burnt out, anxious, depressed, deeply struggling and suffering. And so I was looking at the mental health space through that lens, but I didn't really have the subject matter expertise. And I was craving in my heart to be able to collaborate with somebody who did that in their sleep, who devoted their lives to understanding that. So as soon as I met Matt and I heard everything that he was saying, it wasn't even like a business partnership at first sight for me. It was like there was a brotherhood, a business brotherhood at first sight. So talking about a marriage, and brotherhood is not easy either. And I grew up as an only child.
He one up me. Now he's the brotherhood guy and I'm the business partnership
brotherhood.
guy.
Oh,
That's a great line.
There's this whole thing around is work a family and all that. But truly, Matt has chosen family. We've been working together, living together, grinding this out together. And as we started to unpack all of this, and he shared the richness of his whole experience and everything that he had been learning and seeing, and I could then bring all of the specialty of how do you bring a product to market and how do you do it in a way that really delivers on a customer and a user's experience, we knew that we had to work together. And then I could see the moments when we saw the writing on the wall in terms of what was happening with AI and what was happening in the space, that we said, this is the time where we need to double down on using all of our gifts to really take a shot at transforming these systems. And I remember we had the conversation, we said, that's it, let's go. And from that point, everything started to shift.
What was that moment when you started to see MatterMore? Or like, when did you hear the name, besides your names both being Matt, and that you really matter a lot?
Well, that was like the second layer. A lot of people, when they hear the name, like, oh, so you named it after yourself.
Right.
It was like, we knew that was happening, obviously, but it was really, it came through a conversation of, we were talking about the problems we were solving and all the things we had been learning while we were really doing a lot of deep research and like thinking about different business ideas. And we had stood up one that we were really trying to tackle more of that mental health space. And we were still really talking to a lot of my former clients, like business leaders. And I was living in Silicon Valley by this point. So I was talking to a lot of folks that were working at technology companies there. So we knew about this like LLM explosion that was on the horizon. But really, we just talked about all the people we'd been talking to, these different managers and people in the workplace and all the amazing people we would meet at like retreats or like meditation nights or just like our friends. And there's this sense of people feeling so disconnected from what drives them, right? Again, I mentioned like those people that feel like they build the big, bright, shiny life, and yet it feels hollow on the inside. And so many people feeling overwhelmed and having a sense of hopelessness about what it is they can do in the world and whether or not they feel like they're cared about by their manager. And so this idea of we need to find a way to help people feel like they matter. the explosion of teenagers and people in college reporting that they feel no sense of purpose through the last 2 decades is tragic and heartbreaking. And we saw that firsthand. And it really was like, yeah, ultimately, we're talking about utilizing these principles and the decades worth of behavior science to empower people to build businesses that matter. That when we look at the history of what we do as a people and a society, we'll say, wow, that work really mattered. They didn't just generate economic value. They transformed people's well-being. Their companies will look back on and say, wow, holy shit, look at what they did, that their work matters, that the people doing that work feel like they matter because the interactions they have and the way that their work is structured. We just wanted people to feel like their lives mattered more and have businesses that we could challenge to say, you can generate economic value and have a deeper impact to the goodness of the world without it just being fluffy or like a side project. You could design things that could do both. Your work can matter more. And then we were like, MatterMore. And we're like, oh, and like we're both Matt. And that's always like a funny thing when we tell people we're co-founders. He's Matthew, I'm Matt. And they're like, ha. And so it felt like a fun play on that.
It's such a good name. Sign me up. I'm in. Anything to add, Matthew?
Don't look up what Matthew means. as a
I was going to
name.
ask what it means.
We'll get there.
Now we have to say it.
There was a conversation that I had with an old friend around the time that Matt and I were starting. He was a college buddy of mine who I hadn't spoken to in years. And this was about 6 to 9 months into the pandemic. And when we got on Zoom together, I saw that he had gained a lot of weight, lost a bunch of hair. And I could see in his face that he was utterly languishing, if not full-blown depressed. And I was like, what's going on here? And as he started to share, he was living at home. He wasn't taking care of himself. He wasn't really hanging out with anybody or any of his friends. And he said, my life is shrinking. I don't feel like I am doing anything for myself or doing anything that matters to me. And obviously you take the pandemic and all of that and the adjustment period with that. But then he also shared how his boss at work never appreciated him. And not only that, this was a person who hit him up at all hours of the night, he wasn't able to set healthy boundaries with. And it was completely eroding his sense of safety and purpose. And what sucks is that was one of the only places that we could turn to at the time. And so I saw this and I broke down after the call because I saw a friend, another brother of mine who was breaking down and that the system was completely destroying. And we ended up working with him on this last thing. And a year later, he's this completely 180 my life. And he was expansive. He lost all of the weight. He was in new relationships. He moved back into an apartment. But what did it for him? In our case, we just created a space for him to actually feel like he mattered. That's all it was. And so now what we're doing is we're taking that energy and that attention and we're placing that on these leaders. So we're flipping the equation for this gentleman to his boss. So that person now feels the resource and can gain the skills to turn to the people that they're responsible for. Because one of the things that we say is that therapy has helped a lot of people. It's great. Coaching is amazing, but it's really hard for most people to access. We need to come back to new models where we actually infuse these skills into the people who are responsible for these systems, in this case, the leaders. It's not enough for an HR person or a senior people ops person or a head of talent management to be the one holding this within these organizations. This needs to be distributed and decentralized. And we need to elevate those people specifically who are holding this. And those are the conversations that we're having day in and day out. But yeah, it was at that time when I saw that and I realized what we were doing was not enough, that we needed to go to the heart of these organizations to empower the people who are holding these systems.
It was really scary for me when we really went all in on building a business. Because at the time, one of the other things I was exploring was getting into a PhD program, and I'd actually been accepted into one. And as part of that process, I was talking to dozens of different people who were in academia, who were tenured professors, and asking them about their experience and getting their perspective, getting their advice. And almost all of them either explicitly or just like by the way they were showing up, it felt like they were saying, don't do this. Do not come here. And it was, so you feel
Wow.
exhausted. The way you describe going through the PhD program and how you spend your first few years felt really just like demoralizing and exhausting and stressful. But then also they were basically trying to sell themselves to me. They were like, oh, you're like running this cool business. Can I come work for you? Because they felt I get to research these things, but I don't feel like I'm really having an impact. And part of the problem with so much of how we just allocate our resources is in the United States, we pay for so much research. When I was in grad school, I went and I toured the Finnish education system. I remember asking their minister of education there, in the 80s, you guys were in the bottom of the barrel education system. How did you shift? And they're like, oh, really simple. We took all the research that was funded by and completed within the United States, and we just applied it to how we shape our systems. And what's different there about just a few million people, and most of them are not just the same race, but also the same religion. Easier to make some shifts. The United States is very unique, but still, we're not using a lot of the research that we've discovered. This isn't the knowledge gap problem around why our well-being is struggling. It's an implementation problem. And as opposed to going deeper and deeper into excavating insights that go live in ivory towers, I wanted to be in the trenches. I wanted to actually be shaping everyday people's lives. And it's not about spending time in theory about what kinds of things could we do, what kinds of problems are out there, and we can't stop there. Ultimately, for most of human existence, where we spent most of our time and attention was interacting within our tribe. And then for thousands of years, where most of our attention went was interacting with our family and within our family. And we had that structure. And since the Industrial Revolution, we shifted. And this residential mobility of the last 60 years, most people don't live in close proximity to their families. They're on a weekly basis where you're spending most of your attention isn't with your family. That doesn't mean you don't love them a whole lot or they're not valuable. But when you just look at the numbers, the reality of what's happening and where people are, the majority of time, the one place that we spend the most of our attention other than time alone is at work throughout most of our lives. So you want to transform the world. You want to empower people to transform their well-being. You want to make the world a better place. We need to be talking about how our workplaces are designed, how we're allocating resources there, how those systems are structured.
McKinsey did a study a few years back where they looked at life satisfaction. And they asked, what is the greatest driver of life satisfaction? You know what it was? Job satisfaction. And it makes sense because like Matt said, we spend most of our best hours at work. And this is where our relationships are. This is where our sense of purpose is, livelihood, meaningful relationships, sense of validation. But then when you look at job satisfaction, what the study found is that the most important driver of that was our relationship with our boss or our manager. And that makes a lot of sense because this is the person who's responsible for our whole trajectory. And we know that a bad boss can ruin your life. The greatest driver of physical illness, sickness, is workplace stress. It's the greatest driver. And we also know that an amazing manager can put your life on a whole nother trajectory. Everybody remembers that mentor or that sponsor that they had. That is why they ended up going to where they went. The thing is that we're at a point now where we're spending most of our waking hours at work, and then we're spending most of our time alone. And where are we spending most of our time alone? Usually on social media. We're interacting with these algorithms that are putting content in front of us that are taking us further and further away from our lived experience. And so we're seeing that and we're asking ourselves, how do we level the playing field by harnessing all of the data that exists to put power back into people's hands to inform how do they operate in real life, as opposed to further modulating how do we interact with these systems on social media?
Yeah.
Preaching to the choir. It was like the last couple of years of my life going way too deep into the social media rabbit hole. And it's very bleak. It's very bleak. And I'm so grateful to be working with you guys in this space that you're speaking about so clearly, because I know that this is where there's really the willingness required to make the change. The people we're speaking to, this community we're forming, people are craving. They're craving change. They're craving affirmation that, yes, you're not crazy. What you're feeling is correct. What you're feeling in terms of the chaos and the dysregulation and the just all of these things that are somehow like normalized. No, it's not okay. You're right. Something's really off and it needs to change. And so thank you for affirming that and just reminding me I'm in the right place. We're in the right place.
Yeah. You asked me, what do I do when I wake up? For most, in truth, and for most people, the first thing that they do is they log on to their phones and they're being pulled into some other reality that isn't real. So we're here, and it's beautiful for us that we get to go into our office and to collaborate on these things and to design these systems. And it gives us a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose. But for the vast majority, that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's literally warping our minds and our neurobiology to condition us to further isolate ourselves. And that's not right.
Yeah. Whew, just taking that in. Yeah. I want to ask you about, you've alluded a little bit to some of your journey in leadership and growth and what informed some of your approach to what we're building and why. And I'd love to bring it current. So what's your greatest challenge that you're facing right now as a leader? And how are you moving through that? How do you resource yourself? How do you move through it? How do you grow? What's happening?
You and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. We all have ways that we have wired within our hardware and software of our nervous system for how we relate to overwhelm, that's shaped by the experiences we have. We're born into a biology, we have lived experiences, we write a biography about those experiences, and it shapes the coding of who we are. For me, I become a fragmented overfunctioner. So as a kid, I had ADHD and I was distracted and all over the place. Through the work that I've done through the last 15 years, I can have tremendous focus. And one of the challenges with that is that overfunctioning is still really deeply wired within me, where if there's big, important things to do, I can just slip my foot onto the accelerator and stay there. And it's really important in a startup. Actually, it's helpful and it's necessary. And I'm not going to be any use to the business if I'm just like burnt out and exhausted and my mind isn't super functional. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is really modulating that, of being able to identify how are we allocating resources within the business? How am I allocating my time and attention? What are the priorities? Which anyone that's been part of an early stage startup, that game board is moving every single day. And so continuously, rigorously looking at what's going on and knowing our strategy, refining what we're doing with the product, refining what we're doing with customers and strategy, and like continually checking in with myself and being able to be really honest. Is it absolutely necessary for me to be doing what I'm doing right now? Is there something that's more valuable? And when am I going to resource myself and regenerate myself? And am I being strategic about that? Are there things I'm neglecting about what I need? And how does all of that fold together? And so I think that's like the most present challenge for me, because ultimately one of the things we talk about all the time is we want to hold ourselves to a high standard of becoming a model, not the model. We think there are tons of organizations and really amazing leaders out there that can be the model. There's that idea within Buddhism where, the Buddha supposedly said the next Buddha will be the Sangha. The Sangha meaning community, that it's not about individual leaders that we make gurus that we look up to and we start to chase after and pedestalize. Instead, it's about ecological leadership. And so setting a standard to be one of those positive examples for how do we sustainably operate at a really high level where regeneration is a part of it. But we also don't fall into this trap of just like throwing random perks in and saying, oh, great, now we're prioritizing work-life balance and regeneration. You can't just throw a ping pong table in or a happy hour or say, great, now we're just going to work for 3 hours today, or we're going to do a 3-day work week because that seems like a nice idea. You have to really be rooted to what do you need to do? What are we doing as a business? What are our goals? What's currently happening? What have we learned recently? And what's the most strategic way to allocate all of our resources? So I think that's like the core challenge for me right now is just I'm noticing some things I've really learned this week that I'm metabolizing of ways we can be structuring our time as a team and how I can be structuring my time to be even better at that.
You said something really cool yesterday when we met. We had a one-on-one review.
Tell everybody.
And
I say cool things.
You say really cool things, and but you said something really tangible that helped me. And I asked you, we were talking about this overwhelm and how do you manage it? What's your strategy for actually integrating at the end of the day or however it came up? And I've had a practice of doing inventory, or that's what I call it, right? At the end of the day, to like process out the day, to make sure that I'm not going to sleep with anything looming or lingering, right? Not going to sleep anxious or just feeling like any loose ends are as tied up as they possibly can be to create more space for presence, peace, right? Rest.
Sure.
And then I've had a way of doing inventory, which actually I think I learned in a bit of it could be a self-critical, self-flagellating kind of way and in a way, beautiful way to learn to take responsibility for oneself and cultivate really great self-awareness. My way was really like, what did I do today that was valuable, that I'm proud of, that I'm celebrating? And then also like, where was I out of alignment? Where was I not being myself? Where was I in a defective character? And we all have these, right? When you get to know your personality, it's like, where was my survival stuff coming out? What
saboteur?
What were the moments that felt weird? And then actually processing those to say, wait a minute, understanding what happened, what was I protecting myself against? What could I have done instead? Because I have to learn the lesson. Otherwise I'm just going to repeat the behavior forever.
Yeah.
And I want to change. And then hopefully ending that whole process with gratitude. And wow, I'm grateful. And that brings me to the present moment. But then you shared your version, which was, if you could just recap, but the part I took away from your version was like this piece of throughout your day, if you find yourself doing something that's not yourself, it's not you. And when you work with an intimate team or you're in collaboration with, you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. And we're at work and we're in these teams and we're around these people all the time that we don't necessarily choose. Like we had the luxury of, I chose you guys, we chose each other, but not everyone has that luxury. And it's, wait a minute, I'm developing these mannerisms from like these people that I'm around. It's not me. We can't help but influence each other. And so I noticed, actually, I work very closely with both of you, but with Matthew especially, I shared with Matt, oh my gosh, like some of your mannerisms I was noticing myself do with people where I'm like, let's go.
That's a good one.
It's a good one and it's fun. But when I say that, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't think that's fully me. That feels
to be.
I'm open to evolving for sure. But then Matt said in your inventory, you have that as a piece of like how you clean your day, integrate, and you're like, were there any moments where I wasn't myself? And what actually was an authentic response that I could have done instead? Or I'd love for you to expand on that because I found it really helpful.
Totally. I think about it as owning my responsibility as the shaper and outcome of my operating system. And so what that means is you have to be doing that inventory. Otherwise, you are just passively absorbing beliefs and behaviors without actually integrating them in any sort of intentional way. And so for years, when I first really started getting deep into self-work, it was all intellectual for me. It started in philosophy. And I got into that just because people always told me I was good at arguing. And it was like something I liked doing. And then I got deeper and deeper into philosophy. And so then I started really with my beliefs. Do I really believe that? Like that thing that I did, what was the belief at the core there? And like I said this thing, was that true for me? And like, why do I think that's true? Where did that come from? Trying to do inventory of my mind so that I wasn't walking around with these beliefs that were other people's. I wrote this paper in college and the topic was that the greatest cancer one can contribute to the universe is intentional ignorance about one's beliefs. Because you make yourself a manipulated object of someone else. And again, like the nature of the universe is to connect and expand. And if you are contracting yourself and making yourself a victim to someone else, that's not good. We actually want people to be embodied and empowered within themselves. So I've been doing this inventory for years, right? And I went to this one like meditation retreat, and I was being just so hard on myself. And I realized that what I was doing was I was thinking about how I allocated my time at the end of the day, things that I said and things I didn't feel like were true enough, or things I could be doing better. And that really it was just all about control. I was just trying to eliminate uncertainty, and I wanted to be really rigid with myself so I could dominate my insides, to feel like I had even more control and be like this harsh critic, so that I could respect it, because I had always seen the people that had power would be the ones that are like harsh and critical. And so I was relating with myself that way. And I was like talking to this like dude in his 70s, this meditation teacher. He's like laughing. So I was telling him about this like deep struggle I'd been carrying for days. And I was like, why are you laughing? And he was like, have you ever taken care of a garden? And I was like, no. I was like, I'm not a gardening guy. And he was like, okay. And I was like, gardens are fine. I like flowers are beautiful. I didn't mean to say it like that. But I was like really like rigid. We were having this funny interaction. He was like, well, it's great to go inside and think about your beliefs and your experiences and to do that inventory. If you never took care of your garden, then it wouldn't be that like beautiful maximization of space. It would just overrun with weeds. And so that's great. Do the gardening. But think of like a playful gardener. I think of my inner inventory person as like this older playful gardener who's like making jokes to his plants while he's like pulling them out. Oh, here you are again. I thought I pulled you out. Oh, you look like you need more water. I've forgotten to give you water again. How have I done that? And it totally shifted for me. It's not that accountability is wrong to do within myself, but it doesn't need to be dominating like that. And so I think that's also related to a lot of managers that I've talked to. Have this idea of how am I going to talk to people about their emotions? I need them to get work done. I'm like, great. We want you to get more work done. It's about the quality of how you structure communicating with people to get that work done. You can actually be more strategic and invest some time up front in how you design systems and how you think about interacting with people. That saves you more time in the back end. You're saving time managing less problematic behaviors. And so this doesn't have to be this like dense, serious domination of people or of ourselves. And if saying all of that, you're like, oh my gosh, it sounds like you guys are spending a lot of time just like thinking about your inner world. And I don't know if I have that kind of time. That sounds like a lot of work. The thing is, building a new behavior takes repetition and does take time. But for me, at the end of my day, this takes me 5 minutes. When I first started, it took me like 2 hours. I would sit down and I would like journal, and I might even walk around because I was building this new internal behavior for how I relate to myself. But then once it got integrated, it's like, oh, I could do it even more quickly and even faster and more efficiently. And so these things compound. So as you're like doing self-work and exploring things that help you, sure, it might feel like a lift up front, but it actually gets easier over time, and it can happen faster over time. And that means whether it's the skills and ways you relate with yourself or the ways you relate with other people. Just because they're deeply impactful and we're talking about strategic ways to do these sorts of things doesn't mean they need to take a really long time.
Matthew, I want you to answer the same question of what is your greatest challenge currently in your leadership, and how are you supporting yourself through that and growing?
Yeah. My biggest challenge right now is that I care so deeply about this team, and I care so deeply about our customers, and they are giving us such an opportunity to be able to work closely with their managers and leaders to understand the challenges that they face, that there's a part of me that wants to control for outcomes to ensure that we can give them the best value and quality of service and product and delivery, that I will often contort myself to try and make that happen. And it's really hard because when I see anything that could potentially hurt our customer or this team or add additional risk, I will similarly try and there's a part of me that wants to control that outcome. And so then I'll start to get more reactive or domineering. And it's very much related to what Matt's saying. But that doesn't actually serve any of us, and it doesn't serve our customers. So the challenge and the opportunity for me is to come back to how do we approach this work at the early stage through the lens of experimentation? How do we see everything that we're doing as not a way to even necessarily deliver the utmost value today, but to learn by virtue of testing what works best for people, and to actually give ourselves the grace and to actually surrender that control to say we're not here to necessarily drive the outcome right now. We're here to learn what's working and what's not working, and that our muscle is to continue to be able to run and refine those experiments. It's really hard.
Yeah, our priority has to be the process while we pursue the outcome.
Yeah, it's really hard to do that. Experimental learning is very much what Matt's saying and what you're saying around this taking inventory. We set ourselves to do something because we believe it's going to drive us forward in some way. And what most people do after they've done something is that they just keep looking forward, and they grab more books and they try and read more articles to learn more about what else they could be doing, when actually the greatest driver of learning and performance and success is reflection. Integration. We don't need to look forward as much as we need to actually look backwards and inwards to actually learn from the richness of our lived experience. And if we just take a second, literally a second, 5 minutes, to think back into our day or our week and say, what were those moments where I was showing up fully aligned, where I felt most full? That will teach us to ourselves what are the experiences that we want to cultivate more of. And similarly, what were the challenges? What were the losses? Where was I out of alignment? When we focus on that, then we can actually say, all right, how did that happen? And we can be graceful with ourselves. We don't need to be so harsh. We don't need to be so ruthless with our own lived experience. We can be playful. We can laugh. We can say, oh, that experiment didn't actually work out. Well, I'm going to try this now.
Also, taking the work seriously, but also not from a place of contracting, and really we can get blinders on.
Yeah, and you can't control the outcomes. The work that we're doing is inherently not this binary input-output factory.
It's more dynamic and
multivariable. It's more dynamic. It's multivariable. We're working with humans. And that's why people haven't solved this problem, because it's really complex.
All right, let's check in behind the scenes. David, how much time we got?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm tracking it. I'm wrapping us up.
Final 10 minutes, everybody. Buckle up. We're getting in there.
You guys go a few minutes over.
David's giving us extra time.
So I hear you both starting to allude to the values of MatterMore. I hear you speak about curiosity, having this childlike sense of joy and presence and openness to new experience and adventure. And something I love about the way that I get to show up in work, and we are handling a big complex challenge, and it's big. This is huge what we're doing. It's a big mission. I feel so inspired and so enlivened by it. And it's also so much fun. And some days I'm just laughing so much. And I'm like, but it's okay. I still take this really seriously and I care so deeply. But there's also so much joy and playfulness in the creation and getting to collaborate with you. And I just love that so much, because that's who I am. And that's why I'm here. And I love that we get to really template what is that? We're walking the talk. I really highly value that. We spoke a lot through this conversation about, and I heard you really allude to these themes of integrity, of empowerment, but what it takes to really be an embodiment of true power, not power over, but power that doesn't have to actually have force, right? It's a way of being. It's a way of being influential. True power doesn't always speak as the loudest voice in the room. And it's about presence. and teaching through being this
Mhm.
way of regulation and having an attuned nervous system, being the kind of presence that inspires and just permits with ease a space where people feel safe to be
Mhm.
themselves,
Yeah.
where then creativity is a natural outgrowth of any collaboration.
Yes.
And I love to hear this articulated so beautifully. And it's been my life's work since I was born. and it's so fun to imagine building the infrastructure through which what we're speaking to, can be literally hand delivered to people all over the world.
Yes. What we're talking about is the science and art of learning. It's the science and art of learning, which is core to who we are as human beings. We are innovators, whether it's fire or language or cars or the internet. Like, we can't help but build things. So we want to rebrand work. Ultimately, like, when you talk to an artist, you talk to a musician, you know what they say? Hey, check out my work.
Mm-hmm.
We have always worked and we will always work. We need work now more than ever. Work designed well can deliver people what they are most missing today, which is belonging and purpose. Work, that's what human beings do. It doesn't have to be in a cubicle where people are just there to clock in and clock out and feel stressed and nervous and then go home and then take a sigh of relief and then start living your lives. Work is creating stuff together. That's it. It's what we do. And part of that inherently is learning. It's part of just our DNA. And so we live in a time where we have been fooled by the techno-productive optimism myth. The same myth that was told to us in the 90s and 2000s about software, which is, for our technology, all we have to focus on is spread, speed, and scale of sharing information. Basically, we just need to make our information sharing processes faster so we can make more stuff. And then naturally that will create more free time for people. And then people will use their free time to have a better quality of life. And when we talk to leaders leading the innovation with these technologies right now, that's the same promise they're telling us. And they're lying. That's not what happens. Just look at what's happened through the last few decades. People in their 30s, for the first time ever in this country, aren't making more money than their parents or grandparents did. They're making less. People alive today are expected to live shorter lives than their parents. People's quality of lives aren't going up. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. The quality of impact on these technologies matters. It's not enough to focus on speed, scale, and scope as we spread information. The quality of how we organize and design those systems at the core level and how we regulate them societally matters. So when we're talking about learning, it's something that even these leading technology companies aren't innovating. We talked to somebody last week who was telling us about their manager at Microsoft, who had been a manager there for 2 decades. And they had to go through this training annually for their management stuff. And what Microsoft did was had them watch 18 hours of video that they invested a ton of money in producing well. And he said, so they could be like Christopher Nolan type videos. And I asked, I'm really curious, like, what did your manager say about how effective that was? They said, oh, about 80% wasn't relevant or useful. Is that an appropriate use of time? Is that helpful for your business to be wasting that kind of time where that person feels like that's not relevant and useful? TikTok has solved this. Building an algorithm that doesn't require you to answer a survey about what kind of stuff you like to watch. It learns based on your behavior. The modern workplace is a data-rich platform about who we are, what we want, what skills we want to develop. Learning should be based on us and brought to us. We have the technological capacity to do that. So that's what we're doing. Personalized upskilling delivered to every person based on the data of who you are and how you show up, giving you a collaborator for your development at work and in your life. The place we're starting is with the conversational data on calls and then working with people to make sure we design this technology and scale this product in a way that respects your autonomy and your privacy, because the future of AI is scary if we're not utilizing that technology to help us with our person-to-person interactions and with our overall processes for learning. So we need to shape those technologies really closely with people in ways that absolutely respect their privacy and autonomy. And people deserve to have feedback and insight and technology brought to them to help them develop the skills that we most need them to have right now.
Yeah. The two most important and valuable resources within the systems at work and life right now are leading and learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to become a great leader. It's another thing to learn how to develop other great leaders. And right now we're asking our leaders to have to be able to do both. And we are utterly failing them at a systematic level. I had a conversation with a founder a few weeks ago, COO, MBA, really bright guy, cares deeply about his team, has done all of the personal development work to be able to show up as an epic leader for that team. And I shared what we were doing. And he was like, I don't know how are we going to develop our managers? How are we going to develop our leaders? None of us have ever done that. So even the most well-intentioned, meaning leaders who you can imagine are set up to be able to empower their teams, they don't know what to do. So what hope do we have if we don't give these leaders the skills and tools to be able to invest in developing their people?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're doing. And that's what we're living and breathing on a daily basis. And just like TikTok is leveraging all of the data within their closed system to be able to push more advertising to us and to push more content to us and further hook us into their system, we're untapping the rich data that's buried within our real life interactions, our real work interactions, to be able to flip the script and give these leaders the systems, the data points, the algorithms, all of it that they need to cultivate better leading and better learning within their organizations. And that, we believe, is going to transfer outside of the offices into homes, into relationships, into schools, into our healthcare system. And that's why we're doing this.
I want less dashboards. I want to keep track of less passwords. I don't want there to be thousands and thousands of potential tools and dashboards for me to consider needing to buy and having to talk to dozens of salespeople to decide if this is the kind of thing that I want. I want something that helps me understand who I am and what I need and what's out there. You know what's cooler than generative AI? Integrative AI. Instead of making more stuff and just making our communication of information faster and further, help people connect the tools that we're already utilizing so that we're getting more out of them. Help us reinstantiate our power to distribute our attention to the things that matter most to us.
And let's be real. Do any of us really feel good about artificial intelligence? Do you like anything that is artificial that you've come across in your life? Where's natural intelligence, relational intelligence, at the least augmented intelligence that is designed and catered towards empowering human intelligence?
Wait, but I think I do like some artificial things. I love candy.
Artificial flavors.
We gotta
I
upgrade
really like
that
some
one.
processed foods.
Sounds like we have some beliefs
What
to
else do I
upgrade,
like?
Matt.
Which candy? What are we talking about?
What do I do about that? Sour Patch Kids?
You gotta try the sugar-free kind, the healthy.
Smarties?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Those are good.
Maybe they'll sponsor our next episode.
You guys, I think we're wrapping up. I think we're getting to a close. This is a deep dive. Indeed.
Deep dive.
We delivered on the promise of deep dive. Thank you very much. If anyone has any curiosity about whether or not this team can go into some rabbit holes,
Well,
you've seen.
and if you're watching this, one, thanks for coming this far and being part of this conversation with us. The point of this podcast is we don't have all the answers. We're committed to asking the questions and empowering more people to be part of the conversation. And so if you think you know someone awesome that cares about the future of work or AI or well-being, please connect them to us. We'd love to talk to them. If you think you're that person, talk to us and subscribe and share the podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Anything else I should plug? I feel like I'm on a roll there.
We're standing on our little humble Plymouth Rock.
He left these rocks
You
to
know?
stand on.
He's been standing on rock.
Join us. Get up on this rock. Get up on your rock, and let's weave this
Let's
together.
rock.
Yeah, let's rock.
Let's rock it out, guys.
Was that you saying that?
That's actually what I say, but I don't
Let's
do the
rock.
hand. I don't do the like this thing. And I think we're both like absorbing Matthew's. Let's go.
Yeah, I've become a person that gives peace signs at the end of calls. Like, all right, great to see you. Have a great day.
Do I
I
do
don't
that?
know. I don't know
You
if
do
you do
that.
that. I just know that I've been doing that a lot more.
I like to do this.
like
Live long and prosper. Bringing it back.
I've never been able to. I can look.
This says a lot
We'll
about
work
what kind
on
of
it. It's
leader you are if you can do
it's
this.
a
Physical
skill.
flexibility.
It's a skill. I gotta work on it.
Physiological flexibility.
Gotta work on it.
So you guys, last wrapping it up, concise thought.
Mm-hmm.
I want to leave us with to just tie a nice little bow on this
Mm-hmm.
beautiful conversation today. What do you really wish people listening, joining us for this exploration today and all the ones to come, what do you really hope that they take away from our conversation today, if nothing else? What do you really intend for the gift to be for them today?
Mm-hmm.
That the greatest possible future that you could imagine can be built. That there is a more beautiful way of living that we can shape together. We are not powerless or hopeless. And in fact, not only is it possible, but it's probable if you're part of the creation that you can affect change, that you organizing with groups of people you want to do some sort of work with does matter and can shape the future.
Yeah, not only that is it probable, if we're all in it together, it's inevitable. That we're on the verge of something big, and it's the balance hangs so delicately in terms of how all of this plays out, and each of us plays a role in it. And so if you take the macro opportunity that we have and now drill down into the micro, into our day-to-day, what I would leave all of us with is that there's going to be a moment within your day, within your week, where you have a choice to react in a way that further ensnares you into someone else's agenda or into some patterning from the past that you haven't dealt with. Or you have a choice to make a decision to try something new, to run a different experiment, to lock in a different program, to flex a new skill, a new muscle. And so I want to invite you, when you see that moment, just start to be aware of it. You don't even have to put so much pressure to go one way or another, but just build the muscle of awareness to become even 1% more aware. And when you're about to lash out at your partner, or you're about to go into a whole rumination cycle, getting pissed off at what somebody said to you, take a deep breath. Just take a beat and tune in with yourself, and to give yourself back the choice that is your birthright.
Sid, what about you?
I'm just hearing so many fun, memeable quotes through our conversation that it make me so happy. Like, one of them is I'm envisioning the sign on one of my favorite cafes I used to go to a lot in Bali. That would always make me just smile so deep, like smile in my heart. And it's, we may not have it all together. Like, we certainly don't. But together, we have it all. We have everything we need to create the world that we want. We have it all. Let's actually be present and integrate all the wisdom, all the insight, all the awareness. We are so abundant, every single one of us. Like, we're each a microcosm of so many universes. We're each a genius being. We wouldn't be alive if we were not here to create something extraordinary. It's who we are. It's human nature to be an artist, to be a visionary, to create something that never before existed. Literally every single one of us. And what kind of world do we live in when we remember that and then we choose to play?
Play on.
Amen.
Rock on, play on.
Thank you.
Peace out.
Ciao.